So
Yeah.
yes, let's move on to the second section, which is the fact that the article promotes a known sexual predator, and that predator is, of course, Lily Cade. Now, before we go into the whole serial rape stuff, I just want to go over Lily's role in the article. Why does she matter? Because it's been funny to see how when the article first came out, uh, like gender critical people were running around going, oh, this is like the most important thing ever. These people are heroes, etc. As the stuff surrounding Lily Cade has kind of mounted, they started going, oh, well, why is Lily Cade important? And it's like there's actual screenshots of the same fucking person doing this shit. Um, so let's explore the fact of why Lily Cade is important and her relationship to the cotton ceiling. This story goes all the way back to around 2012 when Lily first accepted an offer to do a scene with Drew DeVoe. She agreed to do that after seeing photos of her, including her genitals, only to withdraw after finding out that Drew is a trans woman. As the article states very clearly, quote, my sex drive was oriented towards women. I couldn't see past the fact that what I was interacting with was male genitalia altered by surgery and not the reproductive organ of a female ape. And I just couldn't get past that. End quote. So she withdrew, and then as a result, she began to be criticized by, and this is her own words here, quote, very fringe queer porno people, end quote. So that's where things were. As far as Drew was concerned, she had left Lily alone. But there's a couple of things to kind of like unpack here, and one of those is the whole notion of genital preference. Because any time you talk about lesbians and trans women, without like it's almost like a Godwin's law of like trans people, the whole notion that there will be someone who will come along and will talk about genital preference. The fact is, Lily Cade had already seen Drew's vulva. She had already she couldn't tell the difference, right? That's why she accepted, only to suddenly change when she discovered that Drew was a trans woman. So it's really interesting here in how this case, which as we'll see is like the starting point for a lot of discourse, started with a lesbian who couldn't tell that a trans woman's genitals were the genitals of a trans woman. And the fact is, this isn't an isolated thing. It's not just a case of, this gold star porn lesbian, couldn't figure out that these genitals were a trans woman's genitals. There are tutorials out there discussing how a person can tell if the woman they are making love to is in fact a trans woman. The most famous aspect of which is, of course, the claim that only trans women have curly butt hair. I have linked, actually, the original thing that discussed that. That's kind of something that's been passed around a lot. But, it's kind of this ridiculous telltale signs that someone is a trans woman. We've also seen this applied in other fields, because not just talking about genitals, but they always know is the expression they use. Sorry. Why was she even showing the other woman's genitals? Because they are porn stars. I should clarify that they are both porn stars. So that's what I mean by a scene. They are porn stars, and yeah, Lily saw Drew's genitals, and she was like, you know what, I will do a scene with Drew, only to discover that she was, in fact, a trans woman. What is political lesbian? We don't have time to get into that. But yes, there are tutorials out there on how to spot a trans woman's genitals, and they are absolute garbage. When the curly butt hairs came up, my wife could not stop laughing as I showed her this for the first time. It really is sad, and it kind of makes what's the word I'm looking for? It reminds me of the incel culture and their tells and signs of different things and all of that, and how they typify different body types and everything like that. It also goes back to like phrenology and everything like that, and the whole idea that a trans woman's vulva isn't a real vulva and stuff like this. And yeah, so anyway, there are tutorials out there. This is not an isolated incident. You know, it really does undercut the fact that this isn't about genital preference, because if it were, they'd be doing like talking about, oh, I only date, you know, trans women who have gone through surgery, which like is a whole other thing to unpack, but that's what they'd be saying. It's not. They are instead asserting, when they say this, they say that there's a genital preference, that every trans woman has a penis. They don't. Not even every trans woman has distinct phallus or vulva. You know, there are intersex trans women out there because, spoiler, intersex people can be trans. You know, so it really does show that this only relies on the basis of stereotyping. And you see the gender critical crowd and like the Women's Place UK at their founding were like showing photos of trans women and like talking about, here is a male in fishnet stockings jerking off. Apparently, you know, he wants to be called a she, and stuff like that. And that's what it is. This whole notion that, you know, trans women aren't women, they're just fetishists. We'll see that come up later in the Gender Critical Manifesto. But yes, it really does sort of tie into this whole genital preference aspect. I know I kind of waffled there. Is there anything you'd like to add, Levi?
Not really.
Okay.
I think I
That's not a
missed
problem.
everything that you said.
Not a problem. But again, all that happened was she was criticised by, quote, very fringe queer porno people, end quote. That was it. Miss Drew did not interact further with Cade. Ms. Drew, not Miss Drew. Ms. Drew did not interact any further with Cade, though around the same time she began discussing the cotton ceiling, which was then later picked up by Planned Parenthood. I've got a quote here from Drew discussing not just the cotton ceiling and what it's about, but also the lashback she received on it. Quote, when I proposed the notion of the cotton ceiling a few years back, the violent backlash against me was profound. Not just death threats, but even more awful were the accusations of rape, of being a rapist. As a survivor of sexual assault, this cut deeper than anything. The cotton ceiling was meant as a means to question why certain bodies, trans or fat or disabled or racialized bodies for starters, are sometimes seen as undesirable, unfuckable, unlovable. It was not a violent term, but as is almost always the case, cis activists violently attacked the struggle for trans equality through making our bodies and identities intrinsically violent, end quote. And this kind of taps into the whole trans misogyny at the center of this, the fact that anything a trans woman does, even existing, even occupying space, is seen as violence. You know, this goes back to Janice Raymond, the very existence of trans women, according to Janice Raymond, who is kind of I'm trying to think of the word here, kind of like the prophet of what we're dealing with right now. She stated that the mere existence of trans women was rape of the female spirit. You know, there's nothing you can do at that point. But as we can see here, the cotton ceiling is not about pressuring cis women into feeling like they have to have sex with trans women. It's not even just about cis women either. It does also discuss how cis men treat trans women, especially considering the fact that when you look at porn results on porn sites, we tend to see something very interesting. But it's just the fact that as a trans woman who has had genital surgery, and even a professional gold star lesbian could not tell her genitals were the genitals of a trans woman, how literally people will treat her differently because they find out she's trans. Like, someone can be up and raring to go, but the moment they find out she's trans, suddenly it changes. You know, there is really that distinction to be had there. And the reason I bring this up is the fact that Ms. Cade has said that she believes it was her that was kind of used as the basis for Ms. Drew coming up with the whole cotton ceiling. In the article, in the BBC article, she stated that, quote, "I thought it was kind of gross. The language is gross because you are evoking the metaphor of the glass ceiling, which is about women being oppressed. So saying that if someone doesn't want to have sex with you, that person is oppressing you?" End quote. Just a problem here. That's not what Drew said at all. We just saw that with what Drew actually said. Drew did not continue contacting Ms. Cade. They did not try and pressure Cade into anything. They respected Cade's autonomy. They left, and they began discussing the cotton ceiling around the same time. Now, again, we don't actually know if Cade influenced Drew. I think it's very unlikely that she didn't, but here's also the thing. Ms. Drew was not talking about a one-off incident. She was talking about an institutional issue, something that had happened again and again and again. So, again, it's a bit odd that Lily is kind of bringing the focus onto herself to almost try and claim some sort of, I don't know, some sort of notion of being oppressed here, whilst also lying about what Drew had actually said. Interestingly enough, Cade would later change her mind and would begin stating with absolute certainty that she is the basis for the cotton ceiling in her gender critical manifesto, as we'll come to later. Now, others have posited analogies to racism. I've got one quote here by, one second, my mind's just blanking, Ash Sarkar, who is a woman of colour, cis woman of colour, and she stated that, quote, that's wrong, that, quote, "Nobody should be pressured into sex with anybody for any reason. I wouldn't want someone to feel like they had to have sex with me out of social pressure. But it'd be fair to ask whether racism plays a part in announcing every 5 minutes that they'd never sleep with a woman of colour." End quote. In response to her, others began noting the nature of racist euphemisms on dating apps, especially the gay dating scene is notoriously bad for this. Euphemisms like no rice, as in no East Asian, no curry, as in no Middle Eastern or Indian, or South Asian. I'm trying to think, there's another one. But anyway, people use these racist euphemisms to exclude people on the basis that they belong to a certain ethnicity. Once you look at things that way, it's difficult not to see the similarities here and to ask, why is the BBC defending this when they hopefully, I'm not so sure, they hopefully wouldn't defend the other. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to this section. I have not been reading the chat since I started that. I will do that now whilst Levi thinks. Sorry.
There was something I forgot before that I guess maybe could add on to this is the thing is I feel like with some of these criticisms there's kind of a post hoc ergo propter hoc thing going on where people will turn down trans women in a really transphobic way, and then people will dislike them, and then they'll say, "I'm being punished for not wanting to have sex with this trans woman." And I can kind of understand. I mean, they're obviously arguing in bad faith, but it's the sort of thing where it seems like an understandable mistake because there's kind of this conflation going on. And so I want to be clear that the reason why people are upset with these people is because they've shown themselves to be transphobic. And the way they've shown themselves to be transphobic is by turning down the trans women because of the way they do it. But it doesn't actually have anything to do with saying no to sex. If they change their minds and have sex with these trans women, people still won't like them because they're still transphobic.
Replace it with any other work interaction. Okay, sex work is work. Let's discuss work. If you refuse to work with someone because they were trans in mining industry, what would that say? Okay? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in like that.
No, that's a good point. Like demonstrates what I was trying to say.
That the transphobia is still there. The sex is irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know, and here, like, the thing is, like, nobody is running around. I gave a talk on trans people and also intersex people as part of my university's LGBT plus sex education, inclusive sex education, because many people hadn't received that. We had cis gay man come and talk about cis gay sex, a cis gay woman, lesbian, come and talk about that, and I was kind of left to deal with all of the trans community and the intersex people. Which I was kind of worried, especially about the intersex people, because I was like, okay, even with trans men, it's difficult enough, but I can at least talk about like the different mechanicals behind everything, pumps, etc. But like this is, I'm really worried about this. Thankfully, there was actually an intersex person at the end who came and thanked me for the coverage, so I think I got the pass on that. But anyway, at the end, I explained the facts that you always have the right to autonomy and you can withdraw consent at any point. That is an important fact of consent. You can withdraw at any point. And, if someone refuses, their body is forfeit. Like, if you have to, like, assault them to get them off you, do it. If you can't guarantee your safety, that's fine. But then I also noted the fact that if someone takes you back to their place and they undress and you realize, I don't, something about your genitals is making me uncomfortable, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the fact that they're trans or intersex. Maybe they have genital piercings you don't particularly like, that has an issue with you. Maybe, you've only used to circumcised people and you don't like, the fact that they have an uncircumcised penis. Whatever the reason is, there is still a way to draw out of that situation without making them feel like shit about it, without body shaming them about it, and I was very clear about that. So it's interesting how what they're claiming is completely different to the reality of things. Sorry, and
I know, that's all good points, and it's nice because you actually know stuff about this and have experience with this sort of thing, and I don't. This is all theoretical for me.
I was
Which
also the
actually,
person who bought the dental dams. I never got my money back from the society, and I should have done it. So that's where a load of Patreon money from my YouTube channel at the time went. It went to dental dams, and it made a lot of people happy because they'd never encountered a dental dam before. Oh my god. It was like when that box was opened at the end. It was like fucking a piñata had just been broken up and all the candy had just fallen out. Sorry, that's terrible. Continue.
actually, one thing I was going to point out is I have never been attracted to a trans woman, and yet nobody tells me that I'm transphobic. And like I'm demisexual, so if people actually did proposition me for sex, which does not happen, but if they did, I would turn down a lot of people, and some of them would probably be trans. And guess what? No one would call me transphobic because I would just say, no, thank you. I do not want to. I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do. It's interesting how if you don't make it about the person being trans, suddenly there are no problems with transphobia.
Yes. Linda Danvers, dental dams are important to know about. They are, and not just for cis lesbians, bisexual women, and trans men. Important for everyone to know about because you can use dental dams on the rear to do certain things. So yes, you should definitely give dental dams a look. Sorry about that. There's just the PSA part of the show. Anyway. So that was her importance to the article. She brought in this whole notion of the cotton ceiling and presented the cotton ceiling as this violent movement to force lesbians to have sex with trans women when that just wasn't the case. We can see it in what Drew said, completely unrelated at a different time. You can see it in how Planned Parenthood talked about it. But sadly, that's a narrative that's stuck. However, things started to get interesting as it came to light that in 2017, Lily Cade had been accused of sexually assaulting multiple cis women in the porn industry. it came to light, a number of people came forward about it and began talking to each other. And like it just started this whole snowball movement. And here's the really fucking interesting part. Lily Cade admits to it. She openly admits she raped multiple women. And there is a link to this in the transcript. By the way, just content warning, that website is a porn site. It's like a porn news site, so there's advertising for porn on there. There is also a copy of the confession in the document itself. You can find it on the side. It's under the title Lily Cade's Serial Rapist Confession. It was not an actual apology. I should be clear about that here. First of all, she stated that raping other women was, quote, was my thing, end quote. She also used euphemisms like, quote, some girls didn't appreciate the bathroom trips, end quote. She is talking about rape and sexual assault there. And I know people are going to come at me, oh, rape requires a penis, and no, actually it doesn't technically, it just requires penetration. And if you actually read some of the accounts, some of those people were penetrated by Lily, okay? She was fucking violent as hell about this. I know all rape is violent, but like she took things to an extreme, okay? And what's really terrifying is that she ends her apology confession by asking her victims to contact her in private. This is in spite of the fact that she is very clear throughout her confession, in which she names specific people that she has raped, that like apparently they felt too terrified to talk to me about stuff. As like, you know, oh, I'm quite a dominating character. It's like, and yet she ends by asking her victims to contact her in private, where she has all the power. You know, this is not a genuine apology. This is firefighting. This is designed to save her career. Because it should be noted, a number of her victims came out and they stated that, like, I have been telling new women in the industry to avoid Lily at all costs. You know, just run. If she approaches you, run. Train says hi. So, you know... Oh, sorry. Just...
I guess like this just shows the irony of, I mentioned how the article was kind of presenting it like cis women never have problems with other cis women like sexually assaulting them or pressuring them to do anything they're not comfortable with. Because as we all know, lesbians are just attracted to every single woman, are just ready to go to anything as long as it's a real biological woman who's involved. And who they cite in that article, a serial rapist who raped a whole bunch of cis women.
And it's going to get worse. But
it always does.
There's another point I was trying to make.
I'm sorry.
Not a problem, I'm sure. I will probably think about it in like 5 seconds. But I contact her in private. They were wanting to. Oh right, yes. And actually, once you like read through that confession, and if you read not just her gender critical manifesto later, in which she talks about herself as being dead because she was cancelled for refusing to do like a porn shoot with a trans woman, her career had not ended by then. It blossomed after that. You know, by comparison, it's the rape stuffs that seem to have like knocked her career out of the air.
I wonder why.
She seems to blame the whole fact that like she was Me Too'd on trans people. Like she blames the death of her career in that regard on trans people, and she talks about how she's dead now, so she can say whatever she wants, sort of thing. So you know that there seems to be that redirected anger there. You know, oh, I can't stop and reflect on the fact that I am a raping piece of shit. It has to be the trans women who are the problem. Of course, people began pointing this out, and the BBC came out and defended the article after all this criticism, stating that it had been through their, quote, rigorous editorial processes, end quote. Now, in my original video, I took that quote and I ran with it, and I was pointing out, oh, rigorous, like you didn't do a fucking Google search to see if this person, one of your main sources who you presented as an authority, was a fucking serial rapist who was outed like 4 years ago. Not 10 years ago, not 20 years ago, not even 30. It's just, it was maddening. I was just pointing out, I don't believe they're either lying about their editorial process, or, you know, they did know and they decided to omit the fact.
How editorial process is better than that? Hell,
Yeah.
the writing process is better than that.
And then, more recently, it's come out that they knew. It has now been confirmed that they were told, the BBC was told by Chelsea Poe that Cade was a serial rapist. They knew this. They knew this before the article went out, and they decided to run the article anyway. What's also interesting is Chelsea Poe is a trans person, and how can they confirm the facts that the BBC knew this? Because they talked to the BBC in an interview for the article. The article that claims with no uncertainty that not a single trans person critical of what was being presented would talk to them. They omitted the interview that completely blew that apart. They are actually editing, and that's led to, it's the BBC scandal going on right now that people are talking about the fact they edited this. But again, they confirmed. They told the BBC that Cade was a serial rapist. They knew this, they ran the story anyway. That is what the BBC means by its editorial process. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add on that.
It's not too surprising. Like I pointed out the square brackets, I pointed out the ways they worded things to kind of hint without actually coming forward and confirming the thing they were hinting at. There were signs that it's very biasly written while trying to look impartial.
So they knowingly presented a serial rapist as a trusted source on the topic of women's safety, because that's what they're doing. It wasn't just a case of, she was like a little bit quoted here and there. She was presented as an authority, and we'll come back to that later.